Let's look at the testable or observable evidence for evolution, which will provide the mechanism for evolution. Evolution means slow change. A revolution is fast. The time for evolution of new species is so slow that it's beyond the imagination of most people, which is why people had difficulty understanding the process. Look at this timeline of the Earth's history. The first life showed up 3.5 billion with a B years ago. Evolution is now accepted worldwide as an explanation for the diversity of life. Here are two common mistakes people make in thinking about evolution. You already know shovelers. A teleologic explanation for their bills would be the duck planned on skimming plankton and made a bill to meet that goal. That's obviously not what happened. Anthro means human, and morph means shape or form. Note, those morphing apps are changing the morphology or shape of something. Morph is from the Greek word for shape. Now, back to mistakes people make. Giving human, anthro, characteristics to non-human organisms. You have no idea if the shoveler likes plankton or likes its bill. The point is, the bill works, and therefore the bird survives to reproduce. You know these blackbirds, they're right outside. This is the male red-winged blackbird. Which statement is the correct hypothesis? The first statement is teleologic or even anthropomorphic, saying the bird gave it some thought. The second statement is the correct one. It offers an explanation based on physical processes. People have long tried to explain the origins and diversity of living organisms. Here are some early explanations for how humans came about. We'll need to move along a few thousand years to learn enough about the chemistry and physics that govern the Earth before we change these ideas. Living organisms adhere to the same physical and chemical processes as the rest of the universe. There is no special inner essence or vital force or vapor that makes life out of mud. Which of these models are we sure is true? How did people respond to Kepler, Copernicus, and Galileo when they suggested that the Earth was not the center of the universe? Galileo was arrested. Copernicus gave up to avoid arrest. No one had any proof of geocentrism. It was simply what they were told to believe. In the absence of facts, it's a natural idea to think that you are the center of the universe. Creation isn't addressed in science because it doesn't offer a testable or observable hypothesis. Science isn't about beliefs. It's based on observable phenomena. We can look at the evidence of evolution because it is observable and even testable. We could make this same table for geocentrism and heliocentrism. In the 18th century, Lamarck was the first to propose a mechanism for the origin of different species. His hypothesis was not accepted because he couldn't explain or show how this could happen. He said if an animal stretched its neck to reach leaves, its neck would be longer. That's true. Compare the size of your dominant hand to the other hand. Lamarck figured offspring could inherit this longer neck. Keep that going for a few generations, and you end up with a giraffe. The flaw here is obvious. Assume you came from a long line of right-handed people. Your right hand should be the size of a car by now, with the rest of your body staying the same size. In the 19th century, Darwin provided an explanation for how organisms change over time. He said that all organisms aren't born alike. We only have to look at the diversity of humans to know this. In this example, the one with the longer neck survives because it can reach the leaves, thus avoiding competing with the short-necked animals. If there were no high leaves, that long neck would be a disadvantage. Darwin's mechanism is called natural selection. Sometimes we say survival of the fittest. This doesn't mean the biggest or baddest one on the block. It means the organism with the adaptations to survive in that environment will be able to reproduce. Darwin was a naturalist going around the world on His Majesty's ship, the Beagle. The early explorers always had biologists with them. In fact, some of the explorers were biologists. Their job was to look for economically useful plants, collect specimens, and observe native people and their culture. Meriwether Lewis of the Lewis and Clark expedition was a botanist. John Fremont was a 19th century explorer who opened up the American West. You know the town of Fremont, named after the botanist John Fremont. The photos are plants in genera named for these botanists. 3 of the plants are local. Darwinia is found in Australia. Darwin observed 13 species of finches in the Galapagos Islands that don't occur anywhere else in the world. So how did they get there? Did these 13 different finches all pack up one day and fly to the Galapagos? Not likely. Darwin began his book on the origin of species with one day a long, long time ago, a flock of finches. Birds can't read maps and sometimes do make mistakes. Birdwatchers have seen redpoll warblers in Golden Gate Park. This bird normally lives in northern Canada. If the birds didn't see the park and kept flying west, we wouldn't know because they would die somewhere over the Pacific. A flock of finches did make the 600-mile trek to the Galapagos. The genes brought to the Galapagos by those first finches is called the founder effect. If all the birds continued to eat the same seeds, there would be so many of the birds competing for food that they would all die. Given that all individuals are not born alike, a finch with a larger bill could eat larger seeds. Another with a smaller bill could eat small seeds, thus avoiding competition. This is all assuming the food source is there and that these mutations happen, which is what happened with these finches. Compare the bill of the large-billed tree finch with the typical finch bill of that first flock. These are some of the 13 species of finches that evolved from that first flock. Can you find the tool-using finch? As the birds stayed near their food source, they reproduced with nearby birds. This eventually led to such distinct genetic differences that the different species could only reproduce within their groups. Darwin called this natural selection. Nature, the available food source, selected for survival of those birds adapted to use that food source. The large-billed birds couldn't eat small seeds. If there were no large-seeded plants, these birds wouldn't have survived. To make his point, Darwin showed people examples in their own backyards. We don't try to get a racehorse by breeding the parents with the shortest legs. Let's look at some examples of natural selection to make the point that natural selection and evolution explain what is occurring right now. We use artificial selection all the time. That's how we got the food plants we eat, the garden flowers we enjoy, the animals we eat or play with. Look at the changes in the bulldog over 100 years. How did this happen? People selected the dogs to breed. They selected dogs that had a particular look. Apparently, people wanted German shepherds with powerful hind ends. When a physician takes a throat swab and sends it to the lab does this test to determine which antibiotics will be useful. Each paper disc contains a different antibiotic. The bacteria are swabbed across the plate. You can see the bacteria didn't grow around some of the discs. These are the antibiotics that could work. The physician will decide which is best for the patient. The antibiotic discs that I crossed out did not inhibit the bacteria. Now look at this plate. You can see some bacteria growing around the penicillin disc. These are the penicillin-resistant bacteria. How does this happen? Here are some bacteria growing. Could be in a human. The cells are reproducing. Mutations occur naturally during the cell's lifetime. Looks like we have a mutant here. There's no way to predict where this mutation occurred. In a gene for metabolism, in a gene for cell structure. The mutation could be lethal, in which case that cell dies. Looks like it wasn't lethal, and that cell survived to pass that mutation to its offspring. So what if this bacterium is in you, and now you have symptoms? You take penicillin, and the antibiotic didn't work, and you're still sick. Now we know what the mutation was. The mutation afforded the bacteria with penicillin resistance. This wasn't planned. The mutation didn't occur after exposure to penicillin, because the penicillin would have killed all the cells. The new trait or gene was selected after the bacterium encountered penicillin, and the only survivors are those that have the gene. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria are a serious public health concern. We can avoid selecting these natural mutants by not using antibiotics for viral infections. Completing the full prescription, this keeps the dosage at the appropriate lethal level, and not using an incomplete or wrong antibiotic from someone else. Do not write these down. I just want to show you something about mutations. Normally, vaccines last for at least 10 years, maybe longer. And we know that you can only get some infections once, then your immunity protects you. Influenza virus mutates rapidly. About every 15 weeks, it has a change in its outer proteins. This allows the virus to grow in people who have immunity, that is, antibodies to the previous version of the virus. The virus isn't trying to make you sick, just trying to survive. If everyone is immune, then the virus has no place to grow. There is nothing else that mutates this rapidly. This process of small genetic changes in a population is called genetic drift. Note that in making the vaccines, we have to predict what virus will be here in the winter. This is done by monitoring influenza in Asia, because influenza generally moves around the world from west to east. Influenza viruses are named for the place and time they were isolated. As we saw with shoveler and mallard bills, and Darwin saw with finch bills, competition for food can lead to new species. This is called divergent evolution, because the new individuals are different or divergent from their ancestor. The red symbol is the ancestral mammal that probably looks something like a dog. Mutations and selective pressure led to these modifications. The horse didn't say, "I want one toe," but that single toe turned out to allow faster running than the 4 toes of dogs. The bat's fingers are lousy for running, but with webbing allow flight. Aquatic environments selected for 4-limb bones embedded in a fin. This wouldn't work for an animal in the middle of a continent. The whale's tail does not have bones. After all, your leg bones aren't in your tail. Note the position of the vestigial hind legs on the whale skeleton. This is a bird cladogram or family tree. The ancestral bird is the red symbol. You know what birds look like, and you saw the difference between the puffin and mallard body shape. Look at the penguin. It looks like a seal. That works great for catching fish, not so good for walking or flying. The bird with these mutations that lived in the middle of a continent would not have survived. COVID-19 is caused by SARS-CoV-2. SADS-CoV causes swine acute diarrhea. CoV-229, NL, HKU, and OC cause the common cold worldwide. Where do these viruses come from? As Darwin said, natural selection. A virus in a bat that gets a mutation that allows it to grow in a camel will only be able to grow in a camel if it gets to a camel. If that virus never left the bat, it would have died for lack of a camel. This is a local woodpecker. The red along the feather shafts gives it its name. The yellow-shafted flicker is found east of the Mississippi. Obviously, the Mississippi or the Rocky Mountains provide a formidable geographic barrier. What did someone see a few years ago? Yes, orange-shafted flickers. This interbreeding shows us the flickers were not different species after all. They were successfully reproducing where their territories overlapped. The name has been officially changed. There is only one species of flicker in North America. As you know, it has 3 color variations. A species is genetically unique. Horses and donkeys have different numbers of chromosomes, which is why their offspring are not able to reproduce. The animals don't know this, but natural selection favors adaptations that ensure reproductive success. Species develop with the geographic isolation seen with the Galapagos finches. Now we'll look at other methods of isolation that lead to genetically unique species. The ranges of sympatric species overlap, but the organisms have different reproductive barriers. Plants will flower, that is, have their eggs and pollen available, at different times. In the spring, you might see a field of poppies, and the next week, the lupins are blooming. Parapatric populations occupy different niches in their environment and are thus separated by ecological factors. These are different species of egrets that can be seen side by side at the bay. Notice the different bill colors. You can't see the feet of the great egret, but they aren't bright yellow like the snowy egret. Their ranges obviously overlap. They are both birds, so they have similar anatomy. Why don't they mate? They are separated ecologically by niche. They both eat mollusks, snails, and fish, but the great egret can wade into deeper water. Species with overlapping ranges don't mate with each other for a variety of reasons, not that they know. The wildflowers in the previous slide are separated by time. Ducks have specific mating behaviors recognized by their own species. Mechanical isolation refers to anatomy. A bird and a mouse have different genital anatomy. And finally, if they mate and the offspring can't reproduce, then the genes that cause the 2 species to mate will go out of the population. We used these figures to show divergence from a common ancestor. Now look how some converged on similar niches. This resulted in their bodies looking alike. The bird, fish, and mammal all have similar body plans. The first time someone saw a whale, what did they say? That's one big fish, because it has the body plan of a fish. And koalas are incorrectly called bears, although the only thing they have in common with bears is that they are mammals. Convergence leads to ecological equivalence. Darwin was English. He knew rabbits eat grasses. He observed grasslands in South America, but not rabbits. After all, rabbits couldn't swim to South America. A rodent had evolved there eating grasses. Yes, rabbits are not rodents. You'll learn the difference in the mammal lab. The cottontail and mara occupy the same ecological niche in different realms. A biogeographical realm is the broadest biogeographical division of Earth's land surface, based on distribution patterns of terrestrial organisms. We can make similar observations with large mammals and their predators. You know the African lion preys on wildebeest. There are no African lions in North America, so what's the bison's predator? There are colonial insects, such as termites and ants, in every realm. They provide a good food source because you can get a lot of them at once. But what adaptations does a mammal need to get these colonial insects? Think about the similarities in structure as we go through these mammals. The photo is a termite mound, and the goal is to get in and eat the termites. You'll see leg-length snouts and toes in the following photos. Not all of these mammals will have teeth, because they don't need teeth to eat ants. The biogeographical realms are shown here. Antarctica is not included because there are no terrestrial organisms. Europe and Asia are grouped because there's no large body of water keeping animals in one place. Oceania includes Australia, New Zealand, Micronesia, and Polynesia. So let's start our tour of termite mounds. Right outside, we have moles. They tunnel through soil, eating insects. They are not rodents, and they are not blind. This little guy's protection from predators is staying underground. This mammal is not related to the mole. The armadillo's protection from predators is rolling up to expose only that hard skin on its back. Unfortunately, they do this while crossing roads. They roll up when a pickup truck is barreling toward them. Armadillos are common roadkill sites in the southern states. Armadillos are originally from South America, but have migrated across the Isthmus of Panama into North America. Our point right now is these mammals eat insects. Armadillos do have some teeth. They have their molars. The echidna is an egg-laying mammal, so clearly not closely related to the armadillo or mole. They fit in your hand. Their protection is rolling up, exposing those hair follicles. Yes, hair follicles. These guys lack teeth. Here's the Eurasian anteater. The scales of the pangolin are made of keratin, like your fingernails. This tree pangolin weighs about 3 pounds. This giant anteater eats insects in South America. It lacks teeth. It weighs about 100 pounds. The aardvark is a sub-Saharan insectivore. They weigh about 100 pounds, so their size is protection. They do have molars. What does the ear size tell you about these two? There is a quiz on Canvas. The password is Darwin.